Welcome back to the deep dive. You know how this works. We grab a whole stack of sources, articles, notes, all that stuff, and we basically pull out the key insights for you. Today we're diving into something really quite fascinating in Islamic practice, Qasr Salah. That's the shortening of prayers when you're traveling. And it's a great window into divine mercy and how practical Islamic law can be. We've looked at, Quranic verses, lots of prophetic traditions of Sunnah, and the different ways scholars have understood these over time. So our goal today, really get to grips with what Qasr Salah is, why it's there, and importantly, how the rules can differ depending on which interpretation you follow.
Yeah, and it's such a good example, isn't it? It really shows the adaptability and, well, the wisdom within Islamic law, how something from centuries ago still fits so well with, modern life and travel. Unpacking the core concept, what is Qasr Salah?
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. If someone's hearing Qasr Salah for maybe the first time, what exactly is it?
Right, so Qasr Salah, in essence, it's reducing the obligatory prayers that normally have 4 units, or rakas. That's Dur, Asr, and Isha. You pray them as 2 rakas instead.
2 instead of 4, got it.
Exactly. But crucially, Fajr prayer, which is already 2 rakas, and Maghrib, which is 3, they're not shortened. They always stay the same.
Okay, so just those 3 specific prayers. Now, is this just a helpful tip, an option, or is it something, stronger than that?
It's definitely seen as more than just an option. It's understood as a ruksha. That's an important term. It means a legal concession, an ease, granted by Allah himself.
A ruksa, okay?
Think of it as a divine gift, really. It's there to lessen the hardship that can come with being on a journey. There's a really beautiful hadith, a saying from the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he calls Qasr, charity Allah has given to you, so accept his charity.
Wow, accept his charity. That frames it very differently.
It does, doesn't it? It means accepting this ease isn't about being lazy or less devout. It's actually embracing God's mercy. It shows that faith is meant to work with life's realities, not against them. 2, the Quranic foundation and its evolving interpretation.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. So where does this idea first appear in the Quran? What's the scriptural basis?
The main reference point is in Surah An-Nisa, that's chapter 4. Specifically verses 101 to 103.
Okay, chapter 4.
Verse 101 is key. It says, let me get the wording roughly. And when you travel throughout the land, it is permissible for you to shorten the prayers, especially have venimo if you fear an attack by the disbelievers.
Ah, okay. Now here's something I've wondered about. That phrase, if you fear an attack, does that mean you can only shorten prayers if you're actually scared? If there's danger?
That's a really common question, and it's where things get interesting. It shows how the Quran and the Prophet's practice, the Sunnah, work together. So, while the verse does mention fear, major scholars who interpret the Quran, like Ibn Kathir or Al-Maududi, they explain that this isn't a strict condition for all travel.
Okay.
Because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he consistently shortened his prayers on journeys even when things were perfectly peaceful. No threat at all.
So his actions clarified the verse.
Exactly. His consistent practice showed that the permission, the ruksha, applies to any legitimate travel. That phrase, especially if you fear, is seen more as highlighting a situation where it's particularly needed or relevant rather than limiting it only to fearful situations.
Okay, that makes sense. So the initial verse might sound specific, but the lived practice opened it up. I can see how someone reading just the verse might get confused, though.
Oh, absolutely. If you only had that verse, you might think fear is essential. But the Sunnah provides the practical application, the broader understanding. It really shows the flexibility in Islamic law. It wasn't just about fear. It was about the general hardship of travel itself. And then, the next verse, 4.1 is out too, actually talks about a specific prayer of fear, Salat al-Khawf. It lays out how to pray in shifts during active conflict, emphasizing, vigilance but still praying.
So prayer remains central, even in extreme danger.
Precisely. And then verse 4.103 rounds it off. It says something like, when the prayers are over, remember Allah, but when you are secure, establish regular prayers. This does 2 things. First, it reminds us prayer is a time-bound duty. And second, it makes it crystal clear. Once you're back home, or just secure and settled again, you go back to the full, regular prayers. Qasr is temporary. It's tied to the state of travel or insecurity. 3, the Prophet's consistent practice and companion insights.
Okay, so the Quran sets the foundation, and the Prophet's actions broaden the application. What specific examples do we have from his life, from the Sunnah? What did he actually do?
Well, we have quite a few authentic reports, hadith, that detail his practice. They really form the basis for the rules. For example, Ibn Abbas reported the Prophet once stayed somewhere for 19 days and shortened his prayers the whole time.
19 days. Wow, okay, that gives some idea of duration.
It does, and Anas bin Malik, another companion, said they traveled with the Prophet from Medina to Mecca, stayed 10 days in Mecca, and prayed 2 rakas for Dur, Asr, and Isha the entire time, right up until they got back to Medina.
So consistency seems key.
Very consistent. Abdullah bin Umar also mentioned that the Prophet, and later Abu Bakr and Umar too, all prayed 2 rakas at Mina, which is a key place during the Hajj pilgrimage. Definitely a time of travel. And there's a really fascinating insight from Aisha, the Prophet's wife. She mentioned that prayers were originally prescribed as 2 rakas. Then later, the prayer for residents, non-travelers, was increased to 4, but the traveler's prayer remained at 2.
Wait, so she's suggesting the shortened prayer is actually the original form for travelers.
That's the implication. It sort of flips the perspective, doesn't it? It suggests Qasr isn't really a reduction for travelers, but maybe the default, the original standard for them.
That is fascinating. It changes how you think about it.
It really does. And the consensus among scholars is overwhelming. The Prophet always shortened his prayers on his journeys. There's just no reliable report of him praying the full 4 rakas while traveling.
Okay, clear consistency from the Prophet. But I think I read somewhere that maybe some of his companions occasionally did things differently. Were there variations?
Yes, that's true. There are reports, for instance, about Uthman, the 3rd caliph, and Aisha herself, sometimes praying the full 4 rakas, like at Mina or on other journeys.
Right.
And these instances, they weren't ignored. They became part of the scholarly discussion later on. They fueled the debate about whether Qasr is strictly obligatory for a traveler or if it's, highly recommended but ultimately permissible to pray full if you choose. It shows how the early Muslims wrestled with these nuances.
Okay.
4, the concession of combining prayers.
Jama. Okay, so we have shortening, but there's another major ease for travelers, right? Combining prayers. Jama. How does that fit in?
Yes, Jama is the other big one. It means performing 2 obligatory prayers together within the time frame of one of them. Specifically, you can combine Dur with Az and Maghrib with Isha.
Dur and Aj, Maghrib and Isha.
Okay. And there are 2 ways to do it. Jama tatim and tatim means advancing is when you pray both prayers during the time of the earlier one. So praying Du and Az together during Dur time. And Jama takir means delaying is when you pray them both during the time of the later one. Like delaying Dur and praying it together with Az during Asr time.
Got it. Takdim is early, takir is late. Are there examples of the Prophet doing this?
Oh, definitely. Ibn Umar reported seeing the Prophet, if he was in a hurry on a journey, delay Maghrib and pray it together with Isha. That's Jama Takir.
Okay, makes sense if you're rushing.
And Anas bin Malik gave another example of flexibility. He said if the Prophet started his journey before the sun passed its zenith, meaning before Dur time, he'd delay Dur until Az time and pray them together Jama Takir again. But if he started after the sun had declined, meaning Dhuhr time had begun, he'd pray the Dhuhr first, then get on his note.
So adapting to the timing of the journey itself.
Exactly. And Ibn Abbas also confirmed the general practice of combining Duhas and Maghribisha during travel.
So combining seems clearly linked to the practicalities of being on the move or being in a hurry. But I remember reading something even more flexible. What about combining prayers even if you're not traveling or not in a particular rush?
Ah, yes. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting for potentially broader application. There's a very significant report, again from Ibn Abbas. He said the Prophet once combined Dur and Asr and Maghrib and Isha right there in Medina.
In Medina, so not traveling.
Not traveling. And crucially, Ibn Abbas specified it wasn't because of fear or rain or any obvious external hardship like that.
Well then.
Well, when asked, the reason given was essentially so that his ummah community should not be put to hardship. The implication drawn by many scholars from this hadith is profound.
Okay.
It suggests that Jama, combining prayers, might be permissible not only for travel, but potentially for other situations that cause genuine, significant hardship or inconvenience in praying each prayer separately at its designated time.
Like what kind of situations?
Things like severe illness, maybe unavoidable and extremely demanding work schedules where taking breaks for each prayer is incredibly difficult, or maybe other situations causing real distress if prayers were separated. It broadens the concept of ruksha, of ease, beyond just physical travel.
Wow. So the principle of avoiding undue hardship could potentially allow combining prayers even at home in very specific, difficult circumstances.
That's the understanding many scholars derive from it. It shows this deep concern within Islamic law for accommodating real human difficulties, ensuring worship facilitates life rather than making it impossibly burdensome. V. Other relevant prophetic guidance for travelers. And just briefly, there are other small points of guidance for travelers too, particularly regarding optional prayers, nawafil. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was seen praying his optional prayers while riding his camel. He would just make gestures like nodding his head for bowing and prostrating, and it didn't matter which direction the camel was facing. He also prayed witr prayer this way sometimes.
So a lot more flexibility for the optional ones.
A lot more. But, and this is key, he never did this for the obligatory, the fard prayers. For those, he always dismounted, faced the Qibla, the direction of Mecca, and prayed properly.
Right. That distinction makes sense. It highlights the weight of the obligatory prayers.
Exactly. It shows there's ease available, especially in optional worship, but the core obligations have their specific requirements, even during travel, unless there's another concession like Qasr or Jamas involved. 6 jurisprudential conditions and divergences. The details that matter.
Okay, this is fascinating. We've got the core idea of shortening, the option of combining, the Quranic roots, the Prophet's practice. But now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because I know the specific rules, like how far you have to travel, how long you can stay. That's where different scholars had different views, right? What does all that diversity mean for someone listening today?
You're absolutely right. This is where we see the richness and sometimes the complexity of Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh. These differences aren't necessarily contradictions. They often come from different ways of interpreting the primary texts, the Quran and Sunnah, or different methodologies.
So different valid approaches.
Exactly. And the good thing is, this diversity actually provides flexibility. People can often follow the view that makes most sense in their situation or follow the school of thought prevalent in their community. It's not about finding the one right answer, but understanding the valid reasoning behind the different opinions.
Okay, so let's break down some key areas. First up, minimum travel distance. How far do you actually have to go to be considered a traveler for a Qasr?
Right. The Quran itself doesn't give a number, a specific distance. So scholars had to deduce it based on, prophetic journeys, customary understanding of travel at the time, and legal reasoning.
Which led to different numbers, I assume.
Correct. There's quite a range. The Hanafi school, for example, generally lands on about 121 kilometers, which is roughly 75 miles.
Okay, 75 miles.
Then you have the Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools. They mostly converge around 81 kilometers, or about 50 miles.
50 miles for those three.
Yes. And the Imami Shia school typically uses a measure of 8 parasangs, an old Persian unit, which works out to about 40 or 41 kilometers, maybe 25 miles or so.
Wow. There's quite a difference between, say, 75 miles and 25 miles.
It is. And then what's really interesting, you have the Zahiri school and some individual scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah who actually argue there's no specific distance limit defined in the texts.
No limit at all.
Their view is basically, if the journey is linguistically and customarily considered travel safar in Arabic, then the concession applies, regardless of hitting a specific mileage. It's a very practical, definition-based approach.
That really highlights the diversity in interpretation. Okay, what about the other big one? Duration. How long can you stay somewhere and still shorten your prayers?
Yes, the maximum duration of stay. Again, different conclusions here.
Okay.
The Hanafi view is generally that if you intend to stay for 15 days or more, you're considered a resident from the start and pray full. If less than 15 days, you shorten.
Less than 15 days for Hanafis.
The Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools generally set the limit much lower if you intend to stay for 4 full days or more, excluding the day you arrive and the day you leave, then you pray full. Less than 4 days, you shorten.
4 days? That's quite a bit shorter.
It is. And the Imami Shia school generally holds that if you intend to stay 10 days or more, you pray full. Less than 10 days, you shorten.
10 days for Shia fiqh. Okay, another variation.
But here again, we have that fascinating view, particularly associated with Ibn Taymiyyah and some Hanbalis. They argue, similar to the distance point, that there's no fixed time limit in the texts.
Really? So how do they determine it?
It comes down to intention, Nia. As long as you do not intend to take up permanent residence, as long as you still consider yourself traveling and intending to return home, you can continue to shorten prayers. Even if that stay ends up being weeks, months, maybe even longer.
So intention trumps the calendar, in a way.
In that view, yes. It puts huge emphasis on your internal state and purpose. This is incredibly relevant today, isn't it? Think about students studying abroad for a semester, people on long work assignments, visiting family for an extended period, but not planning to move.
Absolutely. That offers significant flexibility. So that brings us squarely to intention, Nia. How critical is forming the actual intention to shorten or combine? Do you have to consciously decide, I am praying Qasr now?
Intention is always key in Islamic worship, but how it applies to Qasr specifically, again, there are differences.
Okay.
For the Shafi'i and Hanbali schools, yes, making the specific intention to shorten the prayer is essential, and you generally need to make it right at the beginning of the prayer when you say Allahu Akbar of the Takbiratul Ihram.
So a conscious decision for each prayer.
Pretty much. The Maliki view is a bit more relaxed, making the intention once for the first shortened prayer of that particular journey is considered sufficient.
Okay, once per trip.
But then, for the Hanafi and Imami Shia schools, the intention to shorten specifically isn't actually required as a condition. Their perspective is that for a traveler who meets the conditions, the prayer is inherently 2 rak'ahs. Your status as a traveler automatically makes the prayer Qasr. You just intend to pray Jur, for example, and being a traveler means it is 2 rak'ahs.
Ah, so the status itself dictates the prayer form. That's a different logic.
It is. And when you do make an intention, whether required or just for clarity, it's usually a mental affirmation.
Yeah.
Silently intending, I'm praying dur 2 rak'ahs, or I'm praying dur and az combined, jama tekdim.
Right. Okay, another layer. The purpose of the journey. Does it matter why you're traveling? Can you shorten prayers if you're traveling for, say, something forbidden?
An important ethical dimension here. The majority view, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, holds that the divine concessions, like Qasr, are tied to lawful, permissible journeys. You can't benefit from this divine ease if the trip itself is for a sinful purpose.
So the concession is linked to righteousness, in a way.
In that view, yes. However, the Hanafi school has a different take. They argue that Qasr relates to the physical hardship of travel itself, which exists regardless of the journey's purpose. So even if someone is traveling for an illegitimate reason and they are still sinful for that reason, they can still shorten their prayers because the hardship of travel is still present.
So they separate the physical concession from the moral judgment of the act itself.
Exactly. It's an interesting distinction between the rules of fiqh, jurisprudence, and akhlaq, ethics. The sin remains, but the prayer concession might still apply.
Fascinating. Okay, last point in this section. When does travel officially begin and end? When can you start shortening and when do you stop?
Good practical question. Generally, commencement is understood as leaving the inhabited area, the buildings, of your hometown or city. You have to be properly outside the limits.
Okay, past the city sign, basically.
Sort of, yeah. The Imami Shia school is even more precise, traditionally saying it's when the walls of the city are no longer visible or you can no longer hear the adhan, call to prayer, from the city.
That's quite specific.
It is. And termination. Well, that happens when you return to your home area or, crucially, when you form the definite intention to stay in one place for longer than the maximum duration allowed by whichever school of thought you follow.
Right, linking back to that duration issue.
Exactly. And remember that point about uncertainty of stay. If you arrive somewhere without a fixed departure date, maybe you're waiting for a medical recovery or a business deal or some situation to resolve, and you genuinely don't know how long you'll be.
You can keep shortening.
Yes. According to many scholars, you can continue applying the Qasr rules for quite an extended period, potentially even years, because your status remains uncertain and the hardship of being unsettled continues, as long as you haven't decided to make it your home. 7. Specific scenarios and practical applications in modern life.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground on the rules and interpretations. Now let's try and apply this. What about some common real-world situations? For instance, what if you're a traveler, but you join a congregational prayer led by someone who lives there, a resident imam? Do you shorten them?
That's a very important and frequent scenario. The overwhelming majority view Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali is clear on this. If you, as a traveler, pray behind a resident imam,
Yes.
you must pray the full 4 rak'ahs, just like the imam. Even if you join the prayer late, say in the 3rd rak'ah, you still complete it to 4.
Even though you're technically a traveler. Why is that?
The main reasoning comes from the principle the imam is appointed to be followed. Maintaining the unity and integrity of the congregation takes precedence over the individual concession of Qasr in this case. You follow the leader.
Unity over individual ease. Makes sense. Is that unanimous, or are there other views?
There is a different view in the Imami Shia school. They generally hold that the travelee prays their 2 rakas and then concludes their prayer with the taslim salutations, while the resident imam and other resident followers continue to complete the full 4 rakas.
Okay, so a different approach there. What about people whose jobs involve constant travel, like pilots, sailors, long-haul truck drivers? How do the rules apply to them?
Yeah, modern life brings up these cases. Islamic law is quite adaptable here. The general principle is that, yes, these continuous travelers can absolutely use Qasr and Jama while they are actively engaged in their travel on the plane, on the ship, driving the truck, or during brief layovers where they don't intend to stay long.
Okay, so while working, basically.
While working and away from home. But when they return to their permanent home base, the city they live in, they pray full prayers. And if they have a longer layover or stop where they do intend to stay beyond the Qasr duration limit, like say more than 4 days or 15 days, depending on the school, they would also pray full during that extended stay.
So it depends on whether they're home or away, even if away is their job.
Pretty much. There's a kind of interesting edge case, though. What about someone who is truly nomadic, like historically Bedouins or maybe a modern sailor who genuinely lives on their boat and has no fixed land-based home?
Right, what about them?
Some scholars argue that such individuals whose life is constant movement might actually not shorten their prayers. The reasoning is that continuous travel effectively becomes their form of residency. They don't have a home to be traveling from or to in the same sense.
Huh. So the exception proves the rule, almost. Oh, the other practical one, making up missed prayers. Qada. If you miss a prayer while traveling, but make it up later when you're home, do you pray shortened or full? Or vice versa?
Good question. The guiding principle usually cited is qada follows ada, meaning the make-up prayer should generally take the form it would have had if prayed on time.
Okay,
So according to the Hanafi and Maliki schools, for instance, if you missed dur while traveling when it should have been 2 rakas, you make it up as 2 rakas, even if you're now back home. And if you miss it while home, 4 rakas, you make it up as 4, even if you're now traveling.
Make it up as it was missed. Simple enough.
It seems so, but the Imami Shia school has a more detailed approach. For them, it can depend on when the prayer time began and when it's being made up. For example, if dur time started while you were home, but you didn't pray it until you were traveling, you'd make it up full 4. If it started while traveling, but you didn't make it up until you got home, you'd also make it up full 4. You only make it up shortened 2 if the prayer time began and was missed and is made up, all while still in the state of travel.
Wow. Okay, that's definitely more nuanced. Requires tracking when the time started.
It does. It adds another layer of consideration.
Finally, just to be absolutely clear, does Qasr, the shortening, ever apply to optional prayers, the nawafil?
No, absolutely not. Qasr Salah shortening is exclusively for those 3 obligatory 4 rakah prayers: dur, asr, and isha.
Only the fard ones?
Only the fard ones. Optional prayers, nawafil, are never shortened in their number of rakas. However, as we mentioned, there's greater flexibility in how you perform them while traveling, like praying on your transport, using gestures, not needing to face the qibla precisely. That ease applies to nawafil, but not shortening the rakah count. Outro.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive tell us? I mean, Qasr Salah is clearly more than just a rule, isn't it? It feels like a really profound example of, well, divine mercy in action.
Absolutely. It's wisdom, it's compassion. It's designed specifically to make worship feasible, not burdensome, during the inherent difficulties of travel. And seeing how the understanding evolved, from maybe a context of fear in the Quran to the general practice of travel shown by the Prophet, that's really key.
Yeah, that evolution guided by practice is fascinating.
Yeah. And the interpretive richness, we talked about all those different views on distance, duration, intention. It's not a sign of confusion. It's actually a strength.
How so?
It shows deep scholarly engagement with the texts, and it provides valid options, flexibility for Muslims across different times, places, and circumstances. It reflects the dynamism within Islamic law.
So for you, the listener, hopefully, you've now got a much clearer picture of this important Islamic concession. You can see where it comes from, the text, the practice, and how it gets applied in all these diverse ways today.
Mm-hmm. And given those variations we discussed, especially on things like the exact distance or number of days, the best practical advice is usually this. If you're unsure, consult with a knowledgeable local scholar or imam.
Right.
They can provide guidance that's probably aligned with the school of thought common in your area. or help you understand the options based on your specific travel situation. It just gives you that confidence in applying the rules correctly for yourself.
That's really solid advice. Find someone knowledgeable you trust. So as a final thought to leave you with, consider this. We've seen how Islamic tradition provides this rukhsah, this ease for prayer during travel. It reflects a broader idea, maybe found in many spiritual paths, that faith shouldn't be an impossible weight. It should be a guide that adapts, that accommodates the real challenges of life. So maybe ask yourself, what other areas of life, or even faith practice, might benefit from applying such a compassionate, flexible rukhsah mindset? Something to think about.